It began with a single instruction whispered through the corridors of royal administration, an instruction so unexpected that even veteran palace staff paused before acting. Within hours, names connected to Queen Camilla's family began disappearing from internal ceremonial planning documents. What first appeared to be a minor adjustment soon revealed itself as something far bigger. Prince William had made a decision that could permanently reshape royal hierarchy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Reports suggest the first signs appeared quietly, not through a public statement or dramatic announcement, but through the cold machinery of palace procedure. Aides who had spent years handling ceremonial lists were suddenly instructed to review sensitive documents connected to royal precedence, seating arrangements, formal entries, and internal event planning. At first, it looked routine. A name adjusted here, a draft revised there, but then a pattern began to emerge. Individuals linked to Queen Camilla's family were no longer appearing where some had expected them to be. Their absence was small enough to deny, yet serious enough to alarm those who understood the language of royal paperwork. Because inside the monarchy, power does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives through edited lists, quiet approvals, and the sudden refusal to explain. Senior aides reportedly declined to comment, creating the kind of silence that only made the mystery sharper. Royal watchers noticed unusual movement behind the scenes, and whispers began spreading that William was no longer willing to let informal family access blur the lines of royal duty. This was not simply about who stood where at a ceremony. It was about who was allowed near the center of the crown's future. And for Camilla's circle, that distinction carried a devastating message. The age of assumption was ending. William, preparing for the monarchy he will one day inherit, appeared to be drawing a boundary between the royal institution and private family influence. The decision felt surgical, controlled, and deeply symbolic. No shouting, no public feud. Just a quiet administrative shift that said more than any palace briefing ever could. But removing names from a document was only the beginning. The real battle centered on a centuries-old system that determined who truly mattered inside the monarchy. Most people never think about the order of precedence. Yet behind palace walls, it quietly determines status, influence, access, and visibility. For generations, it has served as an invisible map of royal power. And now, according to growing reports, Prince William had turned his attention directly toward it. In royal life, precedence is not just about who enters a room first or who stands closest during a ceremony. It is the silent code that tells everyone where power sits, who carries public duty, and who remains outside the sacred circle of responsibility. That is why the reported removal of names connected to Queen Camilla's family carried such force. It suggested that William was not simply correcting paperwork. He was challenging a quiet expansion of influence that some observers believed had gone too far. For centuries, the monarchy survived by knowing the difference between family affection and constitutional position. One belongs to private life, the other belongs to the crown. And when those lines blur even slightly, the entire institution begins to feel the pressure. Invitations, seating, procession order, balcony appearances, state events, memorial services, and official receptions all depend on an invisible ranking system that can reward closeness or expose distance. To ordinary people, it may look ceremonial. Inside the palace, it is a language of power. A changed placement can feel like a warning. A missing name can feel like exile. A lower position can reveal that favor has cooled. This is why reports of William's review sent such a chill through royal circles. He appeared to be asking a question that cut deeper than protocol. Should relatives connected by marriage be allowed to drift near the symbolic heart of monarchy when they hold no working royal duty? That question was dangerous because it did not attack anyone openly, yet it threatened everything built on quiet access. It separated service from privilege, duty from comfort, and the crown from private family networks. For William, the future monarchy could not afford confusion. It had to look cleaner, sharper, and harder to exploit. And for those who understood the ancient weight of precedence, this was no small adjustment. It was a declaration that the next reign would not be built on blurred boundaries or inherited assumptions. As officials examined the hierarchy more closely, attention shifted toward one sensitive question that few dared ask publicly. The controversy did not emerge overnight. For years, critics and commentators had quietly debated the growing visibility of individuals connected to Queen Camilla's side of the family. What had once seemed harmless suddenly became the center of an uncomfortable conversation about influence, legacy, and royal identity. At first, the issue lived only in whispers. A family member present at a gathering, a familiar name appearing near formal circles, a quiet assumption that closeness to the Queen might naturally bring a degree of access. None of it seemed explosive on its own, but inside the royal world, small details carry heavy meaning. Every appearance, every invitation, every placement can become part of a bigger story about who is rising, who is protected, and who is being quietly allowed into rooms that once belonged only to duty. Reports suggest some palace insiders began to feel uneasy about where private family affection ended and royal privilege began. That tension grew sharper because Camilla's relatives were not working royals. They did not carry the daily burden of engagements, scrutiny, public service, or constitutional expectation. Yet their connection to the Queen placed them near a powerful circle, and that alone was enough to trigger questions. Was this simply family support? Or was it becoming a soft form of influence? Was the monarchy bending to personal loyalty? Or was it still guarding the ancient line between the crown and private life? For William, those questions reportedly carried long-term weight. He had seen how public trust could be damaged when the institution looked too crowded, too personal, or too vulnerable to private networks. A modern monarchy, in his view, could not survive on sentiment alone. It had to prove that rank was earned through duty, not inherited through social closeness. That is why the debate over Camilla's family became more than a matter of names. It became a test of royal identity itself. Bloodline, marriage, service, legitimacy, each word carried a hidden blade. And as palace observers remained divided, one reality became harder to ignore. William was not only looking at the present discomfort, he was looking at the future reign, the future court, and the future image of the crown. If the monarchy was to remain respected, the center had to be protected before quiet access became accepted power. Yet while speculation continued outside palace gates, a far more significant discussion was reportedly unfolding behind closed doors. According to reports circulating among royal observers, Prince William did not act impulsively. Instead, he reportedly spent months reviewing ceremonial structures, constitutional traditions, and future succession plans. What emerged from that review may have changed everything. William's approach was said to be quiet, careful, and intensely strategic because he understood that any move touching precedence would not be seen as a simple adjustment. It would be read as a message. For years, he had built a reputation as a future king who watches before he acts, listens before he moves, and studies the pressure points of the institution he will one day inherit. This time, those pressure points reportedly led him toward one uncomfortable conclusion. The monarchy could no longer afford confusion between loyal relatives and official royal rank. Sources suggested that senior advisors were asked to examine how ceremonial roles should function in a smaller, sharper monarchy, one where every visible position must carry clear purpose. That review reportedly reached into questions of public duty, constitutional symbolism, family boundaries, and long-term trust. It was not just about Camilla's relatives. It was about the type of crown William believed must survive after Charles. A monarchy surrounded by too many unofficial figures risked looking soft, crowded, and vulnerable to criticism. A monarchy built around working royals, public service, and clean lines of responsibility could appear stronger. That was the heart of the matter. William was not only thinking about today's guest lists, he was thinking about state funerals, coronations, national services, balcony moments, official processions, and the public image of the royal family for decades to come. Every ceremony tells a story, and he reportedly wanted that story to be impossible to misunderstand. Those who serve stand forward. Those who do not serve remain outside the central line. It was a hard standard, but in royal history, hard standards often become survival tools. Behind the careful language of review and protocol, something far more dramatic was taking shape. A future king was testing the limits of inherited custom and asking whether private closeness had quietly been mistaken for royal entitlement. And that question, once placed on the table, could not easily be removed. Because when William began preparing for his future reign, he was also preparing to disappoint people who had grown comfortable with the old arrangements. The review eventually produced recommendations, and those recommendations reportedly left one royal faction deeply unsettled. Then came the moment that insiders claim changed the atmosphere entirely. Administrative instructions were allegedly issued. Ceremonial arrangements were reassessed. Long-standing assumptions about status and placement were suddenly questioned. The message was unmistakable. A new approach was taking shape. What had existed for months as speculation now appeared to be moving into action. According to reports circulating among royal observers, palace departments responsible for planning future events were asked to revisit existing procedures. On paper, the changes seemed technical. In reality, they carried enormous symbolic weight. The monarchy has always communicated through signals that outsiders rarely notice. A revised list, a changed seating plan, an adjusted order of arrival. These details may appear insignificant to the public, but inside royal circles, they can speak louder than any official announcement. That is why the reported instructions immediately attracted attention. Individuals who had once assumed their place within certain ceremonial structures reportedly found those assumptions being quietly challenged. No public confrontation occurred. No dramatic declaration emerged from Buckingham Palace. Yet the effect was impossible to ignore. Questions began circulating among staff, advisors, and commentators. What exactly was changing? Who had authorized it? And more importantly, what larger strategy sat behind it? Some observers reportedly viewed the developments as that William's long-term review was no longer theoretical. It was becoming policy. Others interpreted the move as an attempt to draw a sharper distinction between working royals and extended family connections. Either way, the atmosphere reportedly shifted. The confidence that had surrounded old expectations began to weaken. In its place came uncertainty. Palace insiders were said to be studying every adjustment, searching for clues about where the future monarchy was heading. Media attention followed closely behind. Royal commentators who had previously dismissed whispers of reform suddenly found themselves discussing precedence, ceremonial ranking, and institutional modernization. The conversation expanded beyond one family and became something much larger. It became a debate about what the crown should represent in the decades ahead. Supporters of change argued that a modern monarchy needed clear boundaries and visible accountability. Critics questioned whether tradition was being altered too aggressively. Yet beneath those competing opinions stood one undeniable reality. William appeared determined to reshape the institution according to principles that would survive long after temporary controversies faded away. The reported procedural changes, therefore, carried significance far beyond paperwork. They represented a struggle between old assumptions and new expectations, between inherited access and earned responsibility. Every revised document seemed to hint at a future where royal status would be tied more closely to service than proximity. For some, that future looked disciplined and necessary. For others, it looked deeply unsettling. But the consequences stretched beyond ceremonial paperwork and into the very heart of the monarchy's future. For Queen Camilla, the reported developments created an extraordinarily delicate situation. Caught between loyalty to her family and responsibility to the crown, every move carried enormous scrutiny. And according to observers, the pressure was becoming impossible to ignore. Camilla's position was unlike anyone else's inside the royal family. She was queen, standing beside the king at the highest level of monarchy, yet she was also a mother, a private figure, with children and relatives outside the bloodline of the crown. That balance had always required care. But now, as reports of procedural changes spread, that balance began to look painfully fragile. Every question about precedence carried an unspoken challenge. Where did Camilla's personal world end, and where did the monarchy begin? Supporters might argue that her family deserved dignity and respect after years of loyalty through public storms. Critics, however, saw something far more dangerous. They believed even the appearance of special access could damage a monarchy already fighting to preserve trust. And once William's review reportedly touched the names connected to her circle, the matter became deeply personal. It was no longer only about documents. It was about humiliation, influence, and the fear of being pushed to the edge of a future royal order. Media attention intensified with ruthless speed. Commentators began asking whether Camilla's relatives had been too visible, whether their presence had created confusion, and whether William was now correcting what earlier generations had avoided confronting. Behind that public debate, speculation grew about the private dynamic between William and Camilla. Their relationship has often been described as careful, controlled, and shaped by history. Now, according to observers, this reported decision placed new pressure on that already sensitive connection. William was not attacking Camilla directly, but the implications were impossible to miss. A boundary was being drawn around the monarchy he expected to inherit, and those outside the working royal structure were being moved away from its most powerful symbols. For Camilla, that meant accepting a painful reality. The crown could honor her role while still limiting her family's reach. That distinction may have been institutionally necessary, but emotionally, it carried a sharp edge. It suggested that affection would not overrule duty, and marriage would not automatically extend royal standing to everyone nearby. Inside this tension was the deeper tragedy of monarchy itself. Private hearts bend toward family, but the crown demands distance. Camilla stood at the center of that conflict, knowing that any response, anger, silence, resistance, or acceptance would be studied as a sign of weakness or defiance. As the debate intensified, attention turned toward the one figure whose response could determine how the story ultimately ended. Throughout the unfolding controversy, one question lingered over every discussion. What did King Charles think? As both monarch and husband, he occupied an impossible position. Every decision risked disappointing someone he cared about. On one side stood the duty of the crown, cold, demanding, and larger than any private relationship. On the other stood Queen Camilla, his wife, whose family connections had now become part of a growing royal storm. Reports suggest Charles understood the danger immediately. If he pushed back against William too strongly, he risked appearing to protect private interests over institutional clarity. If he allowed the changes to continue without question, he risked leaving Camilla isolated at the very moment scrutiny around her family was intensifying. It was a brutal royal balance, and no option came without pain. Charles has spent his reign trying to hold together a monarchy, under pressure from illness, public expectation, family fracture, and the constant demand for modernization. Yet this issue struck at something especially sensitive: neutrality. A king cannot appear to favor one private circle over the future structure of the crown. He must stand above personal emotion, even when personal emotion is exactly what the crisis touches. That is why observers described the reported discussions as politically tense and emotionally heavy. Every faction had a reason to press him. Those sympathetic to Camilla feared that William's direction could humiliate her family and reduce their place in royal life. Those close to the future monarchy believed the institution needed firmer borders before the next reign began. Charles, caught between them, reportedly faced the oldest royal dilemma of all: protect the people closest to him, or protect the system that gives his life meaning. The deeper problem was that William's argument was difficult to dismiss. A streamlined monarchy cannot function if unofficial figures seem to gather symbolic weight without public duty. The public may forgive tradition, but it rarely forgives confusion. And Charles knew that succession planning was no longer distant theory. Every decision made now would shape how smoothly power eventually passes to William. This made the controversy more than a family disagreement. It became a test of whether Charles could prepare the crown for the future without reopening wounds inside his own household. Silence became strategy. Caution became survival. But even silence carried a message. By not publicly challenging the reported review, Charles allowed William's position to grow stronger. And in that quiet space, the future began to speak louder than the present. And as Charles weighed the consequences, Prince William's broader vision for the monarchy began coming into focus. What appeared to be a dispute over ceremonial ranking was never really about seating charts or protocol. It was about the future of the monarchy itself. At its core stood a fundamental question: who should carry royal privilege and who should not? For Prince William, the answer appeared to rest on one unforgiving principle: privilege must be tied to service. In the monarchy he is preparing to inherit, visibility cannot simply come from closeness, marriage, friendship, or private family comfort. It must come from duty performed under public pressure. That is why the reported changes to precedence carried such deep symbolic force. They suggested a future court, where working royals stand at the center, extended relatives remain respected but separate, and the crown no longer leaves room for confusion about who represents the institution. To some, this vision may seem severe. To others, it looks necessary. The royal family has spent years battling questions about cost, relevance, loyalty, and trust. Every public appearance now matters. Every name on a list tells the nation something. Every ceremonial placement becomes part of a larger argument about whether the monarchy is adapting or clinging to old habits. William's reported approach seemed to recognize that survival in the modern age requires discipline. A streamlined monarchy cannot afford soft edges where private families drift into public symbolism without clear responsibility. It cannot allow emotional loyalty to weaken institutional strength, and it cannot build the future around arrangements that ordinary people do not understand. The public reaction, as always, would be divided. Some would see the decision as cold, even ruthless. Others would see it as a firm correction, a necessary reminder that the crown is not a family business, but a national trust. That contrast made the controversy so powerful. Behind the quiet paperwork was a deeper struggle between affection and authority, between personal ties and public duty, between the world Charles had tried to balance and the world William was preparing to command. Camilla's family, in this telling, became the symbol of a wider question the monarchy could no longer avoid. How many people can stand near the crown before the crown itself begins to lose definition? William's answer appeared clear. The center must be protected. The line must be drawn. The future must be built before the old assumptions harden into permanent expectation. And in that decision, the monarchy's next chapter began to take shape not with a speech, not with a scandalous confrontation, but with the quiet force of precedence rewritten. Because in the end, the battle was never about one family or one document, it was about defining who truly belongs at the center of the crown's future. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.